Oh, this is gonna be a long one. Welcome to Chiller Thriller, also known as Horror for Scared People. My name is Riley, and I am here to guide you through horror movies if you ever just feel like they're sometimes too much for you. This is a judgment-free zone. I will start by listing the timestamps of all the major to minor jump scares in this movie, and then I will list the timestamps of any other disturbing, scary, gross moments that occur in this movie. Now, if there's specific triggers that you have or any specific content you're worried about showing up in this movie, stick around because we're going to discuss all of that in just a minute. And the movie in question today is 2019's It Chapter 2. This movie is just shy of 3 hours, so we've got no time to waste. Surprisingly, there's also significantly less jump scares in this movie than there were in Chapter 1, so instead of breaking them up into categories, I'm just going to lump them all together and list them here. If jump scares are all that make you worried, I really hope you enjoy watching It Chapter 2. Now, if you want to talk about how scary the movie is, I would say it's a lot less scary than the first movie, but it is way, way sadder. So a lot of the things I'm going to be warning you about are emotionally harrowing or upsetting things rather than gross, scary things. But don't worry, there's a lot of that in this movie as well. Now we have arrived in Spoiler Town. This movie has a really, really rough entry. Much like the first chapter, if you're familiar with the book, you know what's going to happen, but it does not make it any easier to watch. The movie opens with one of the first scenes from the novel, in which a gay couple at a carnival in Derry is attacked by a group of kids, and one of the men, Adrian, is thrown off of a bridge. They also hurl homophobic slurs at the men in the process. It is incredibly violent and hard to watch, and it culminates as Adrian's boyfriend is forced to watch as Pennywise appears and devours Adrian in front of him. It certainly sets a tone and drives home the concept that fears grow and evolve as you get older, and the fear that this man must have felt in this moment was certainly enough for Pennywise to show up and kill him. This latest Pennywise attack draws the attention of Mike, played by Isaiah Mustafa, who has remained in Derry since the events of the first movie, and prompts him to get in contact with the now adult losers and have them make good on their blood oath. We first meet Bill, played by James McAvoy, who is a writer working on a film adaptation of one of his novels in Hollywood. We see him have a physical reaction as he hears Mike say the word Derry, and it really sets up the dread that must be setting in for all of the losers as they realize the implications of this phone call. We see it next with Eddie, played by James Ransone, who is now living in New York in a seemingly miserable marriage with a woman who is played by the same actress who played his mother in part 1.
And what if you hydroplane?
I'm not gonna hydroplane.
So they really aren't kidding when they say that Eddie married his mother. He is now a risk analyst, which is an incredibly funny career choice for our boy Eddie, and when his caller ID shows that he's getting a call from Derry, it causes him to crash his car in what is almost a jump scare, but not quite. We move on to Richie, who is played to perfection by Bill Hader in this installment, immediately after receiving the phone call from Mike, as he is vomiting over a balcony in the direction of the camera, which is something I hate. Richie is now a successful, raunchy stand-up comedian and probably has a lot of specials on Netflix. Something I really admire about this adaptation in general is the way they update little things like the jobs the losers have as adults or the fears they have as kids to make it make sense in the time period it's taking place in, while also maintaining the integrity of the character. In the book, Richie is a radio DJ, and while those certainly still exist, they are much less successful and popular than the John Mulaney's, or more appropriately, the Tom Segura's of the comedy world. Similarly, Eddie was a private car driver, which is much less of a thing in present day, and risk analyst is just such a good joke. Next up, we meet adult Ben, who is the hottest man on the planet, played by Jay Ryan, and honestly, if anyone deserves it, it's Ben. He is a very successful architect, and we see him in his beautiful home gazing longingly at the yearbook page that Bev signed for him 27 years ago. After catching up with Ben, we meet adult Stanley, who is played by Andy Bean, through this really pretty transition shot. Now, this was one of the first moments in the movie where I was really struck by how much the adult counterparts look like the child actors from the first movie. It's stunning to me that they were able to find actors that realistically look like older versions of these kids, but are also incredible actors. Stan has exactly the kind of life you would hope for him, as he's working on a puzzle in his home while he and his lovely wife plan a vacation together. But unfortunately, this is all short-lived as he gets the call from Mike, and we see pure fear and dread take over his body. We can remember how afraid Stanley was in the house on Neibolt Street during Chapter 1, and how close he came to being consumed by it. It seems as though Stan feels that history will repeat itself and that he will be unable to stand up to it without his friends coming in to save him. Things are about to get really dark again as the overwhelming fear of coming face to face with it and anything bad happening to his friends due to his perceived weakness proves to be too much for Stan, as we are shown him taking his own life in his bathtub at home. Obviously, this is another really upsetting scene, and while it isn't incredibly graphic, there is still a fair amount of blood, and the concept itself is really upsetting. This movie is really top-heavy with difficult scenes to watch as we move on to adult Bev, who is played by Jessica Chastain in a brilliant casting decision. She is just as incredible and badass as she was in Chapter 1. Out of all the losers, Bev seems the most prepared to drop everything and return to Derry, and we can pretty much see why, as it is revealed that she is still stuck in the cycle of abuse as her husband becomes verbally and physically abusive with her.
You're a bad fucking liar, Bev.
It's a really intense and violent scene, but luckily Bev gets away and we see her making her way to Derry to reunite with the losers. Before we see all the living losers together again, we catch up with adult Henry Bowers, and we see that he has been placed in a mental institution after being arrested for the murder of his father in Chapter 1. While in his room, he is visited by a terrifying jump scare of his friend Patrick in the decaying body that he died in. It's really like 2 or 3 jump scares right in a row, and it's really so excessive. Patrick gives Bowers his knife back, and get ready for him to become a problem for our losers in this movie. Thankfully, we get a break from the really harrowing stuff as the losers all meet up at the Jade of the Orient for dinner.
I propose a toast to the losers.
All right.
The Chinese restaurant scene is one of my favorite scenes from the miniseries, and is now one of my favorite scenes from this movie because it does the same thing for me that the quarry scene does in Chapter 1. It is just so well acted and really reaffirms the essence of the friendships of these characters that are so crucial to this movie.
No, I got married.
Richie, I don't believe it.
When? Did I hear this?
No.
Oh, you know I got married?
No.
Yeah, no, me and your mom are very, very happy right now.
Anyway, I love this scene so much. It took me an eternity to watch it because I kept rewinding to go back and hear funny lines again. It's so excellent. Things take a turn for the scary, of course, once the losers receive all their fortune cookies, and when they open them up, the fortunes inside are just all one word and don't make any sense. But when they put them all together, it reads, "Guess Stanley could not cut it." This sends the losers into a frenzy as they were already wondering why Stanley wasn't there, and now it's beginning to set in that something bad has probably happened to him. As their panic rises, a variety of horrifying CGI creatures bursts out of their fortune cookies to torment them until this poor waitress walks in on Mike smashing a chair against the table. And I just really hope they gave her an excellent tip. As they are quickly leaving the restaurant, Richie freaks out at this kid who he believes to be it in disguise, but turns out is just a fan of his comedy special.
I'm not afraid of you!
The fun's just beginning. The line from your act, dude.
It's a really nice and much needed comedic bit before they speak with Stanley's wife on the phone and learn that he is in fact dead. The news is tough on everyone, and nearly all of them make the decision to pack up their things and go home because the stakes just got way too real and way too high. As the one who has actually remained in Derry all of this time obsessively tracking it, Mike begins to feel desperate to get them all to stay, and he decides that if he can convince Bill to stay, the others will as well, because he is sort of the anchor of their group. Before Mike can carry out his plan, we cut to another rough scene as Pennywise kills this cute little girl at this Little League baseball game. This scene is super well acted, and it contains a couple of jump scares that consistently get me so good.
Okie dokie. Just come on in a little closer, and we'll blow it away on the count of 3.
We also see Henry Bowers escaping the mental institution after killing a nurse and a guard, and he rides off in a getaway car driven by his dead friend Patrick, which I think is a really goofy and fun visual gag.
Hey, Hofstetter. Let's go!
Back to Mike, he proceeds to drug Bill in order to get him to trip so he will experience what Mike experienced when he went to visit a Native American tribe to get information on it. It's a pretty standard Stephen King device to use this sort of native mysticism to explain a plot point, and I don't feel entirely qualified to speak on the appropriateness or the accuracy of this portrayal, but it is there. I truly don't understand the logistics of Mike's visit to the Native Americans, but it's recreated here through this crazy CGI drug trip that's honestly kind of intense. It is worth noting, however, that James McAvoy's performance in this scene is really funny, regardless of how I feel about the scene as a whole.
Why would you do that?
To open my eyes.
I don't feel real good.
But basically the gist of it is that they have to perform the ritual of Chud, which is apparently the only way to defeat it once and for all. They bring this information back to the rest of the losers at the townhouse where they are all staying, and we get some more top-notch performances. I mean, just look at these Jack Dylan Grazer mannerisms that James Ransone is doing. Mike tells them that for the ritual to work, they all need to locate an artifact that represents the time they spent apart that summer after their huge blowout fight outside Neibolt House. It's important that they remember all the details of that summer, and while collective memory is helping them to fill in some of the gaps, they still need to fill in everything from the time that they were separated. They find Stanley's artifact in their clubhouse, which is something that is really important to the group in the book, but unfortunately didn't make it into the final cut of the first movie. So it feels pretty out of place to have this emotional reunion at this place we have never heard of until right now. Stan's artifact is a shower cap, which again was not referenced in the first movie, but I cut this one a little slack because it gives us this really cute flashback scene, so I can't be too mad at it.
Stanley, we're not afraid of fucking spiders.
We also see a conversation started by Stan asking if they think they will all be friends when they're adults.
Do any of your parents still hang out with their friends from middle school? I mean, things might be different then.
It also really stings that while the rest of them have this opportunity to reconnect with each other as adults, they never get to see the person that Stan grew up to be.
I wonder what he was like all grown up.
Probably what he was like as a kid. Best.
Beth goes out to find her artifact in the home she shared with her abusive father, which is now owned by a seemingly sweet old lady, Mrs. Kirsch. Mrs. Kirsch's skin begins to blister and bubble, and her demeanor changes to become more and more unsettling until she is revealed to be Pennywise in this giant old lady creature hybrid thing. The setup for this scene is really good, and I had my hands over my eyes the entire time while I was watching this in my apartment by myself the other day. Although ultimately the CGI is kind of goofy, it's just a lot. Luckily, Bev finds her artifact, which is the poem that Ben wrote for her when they were kids. Richie is next, locating his artifact, which is a token from the local arcade. The significance of the token comes from a time when Richie was trying to connect with another boy at the arcade, who was revealed to be Henry Bowers' cousin. Now, when this was revealed, Bowers and the kid both started hurling homophobic slurs at Richie until he ran away in terror. While recovering from this encounter, Richie is attacked by that lumberjack statue from the town square, and it is so big and scary, and there are bats flying out of its mouth, and it is just out of control. While adult Richie reflects on this fear that has followed him into adulthood, Pennywise shows up, creepy as ever, singing at Richie,
I know your secret, your dirty little secret.
I can only imagine that for Richie, as somewhat of a celebrity, the fear of having the general public know something that you want to keep personal and private and intimate must be so intense, and that's what's personified here. Bill locates Georgie's paper boat, his artifact, in the sewer after being reunited with his bike Silver.
Silver! Away!
He hears creepy voices in the sewer, and a bunch of little baby hands claw at him as he's trying to pull the boat out of the sewer. He's confronting his fear of the guilt he has held onto since Georgie's death, and it's really interesting to see how the losers' basic fears are the same, but since they've been left to fester for so long, they've just grown bigger and bigger in scope as they've gotten older. We encounter the boy from the Chinese restaurant again, and he tells Bill that he's been hearing voices in his bathtub, and this does not sit well with Bill.
You leave Derry and you stay out of Derry. Do you understand me?
Ben's artifact is the yearbook page he has held on to all this time, signed by Bev, and we are treated to a flashback scene to show how he was tormented that summer while the losers were not speaking.
You actually thought I could like someone as fat and gross and disgusting like you?
It takes on the form of Bev, and she is so mean to him and her whole head catches on fire, but honestly, just my friend being that mean to me alone would terrify me. There is a big old jump scare that made me lose my mind, but we also get
Kiss me, fat boy.
and I literally cheered when I heard those words come out of Bill Skarsgård's mouth. Back at the townhouse, Beverly and Ben talk about the poem, and it's revealed that Beverly still thinks Bill is the one who wrote it. You can practically hear the record scratch.
The more I can see that moment, the more I can see Bill.
Richie returns shell-shocked after his encounter with Pennywise and tells everyone he is done, he is going home. While piecing together his memories from that summer, Eddie returns to the pharmacy where the same creepy old pharmacist and his daughter are still working. He realizes that his artifact is his inhaler, and he remembers through flashback a time that he encountered it when he was all on his own after the big fight. We get this absolutely incredible dissolve from James Ransone into Jack Dylan Grazer that really emphasizes how much these actors look alike. They just had to do it. Young Eddie finds a visage of his mother strapped to this bed, being attacked by the leper from chapter 1, and overcome by fear, he abandons her. The leper attack is so gross though, so I mean, who could blame him? As an adult, Eddie no longer sees his mother there, but just when he thinks the coast is clear, the leper appears. Although this time, instead of running away, Eddie chokes him out. Now, I truly don't know what to say about what happens next, so I'm just gonna leave it here for you to watch. I got nothing. In the townhouse once again, Beverly and Bill share another kiss with no mention of Bill's wife. Anyway, there's a bloody skateboard rolling around and Bill realizes that the kid from before is in trouble, so he is out of there. Upstairs, Eddie is trying to clean up and chill out in the bathroom, which majorly backfires because Henry Bowers jump scares him and stabs him through the cheek with a knife. I don't know what it is, but something about this injury is so horrific to me. I literally clench up every time I think about it. I also feel like Eddie reacts exactly as I would if, God forbid, I was ever in this situation. Minus the whole pulling the knife out of my cheek and stabbing the guy with it. I'm not that wild. It's funny to me how bravely Eddie can act when push comes to shove, given how terrified he is of things like gray water and hypothetical infections. It's nice to see that when something serious happens, he can really step up, and I think that's a cool character trait.
Bowers is in my room.
Bill is out of his mind, sprinting through this carnival, looking like John Travolta in Grease as he makes his way into this terrifying funhouse. The design of this funhouse rocks, and it is the perfect setup for Pennywise to be extra scary. Bill has managed to get separated from the skateboard kid by a pane of glass, and then he can do nothing but watch as Pennywise devours this poor kid. As he is driving away, Richie notices a sign outside the synagogue with Stanley's name on it, and that compels him to go inside. While inside, we get to hear Stanley's speech from his bar mitzvah, which is something I'm so glad they included. It's beautiful, it's poignant, it's badass.
I know I'm a loser. And no matter what, I always fucking will be.
It plays over a sweet montage of the losers from 27 years ago, including the shot of Richie carving his initial into what they called the kissing bridge, but we'll get back to that shot later. Along with the details of the horrible things that happened to them, they also forgot the really incredible moments too. Stanley says that he doesn't want to forget, and this beautiful memory gives Richie the strength that he needs to go back and face it. In the end, even though Stanley thought he would get everybody killed if he showed up, he actually gave Richie what he needed to fight.
Thanks for showing up, Stanley.
We check back in with Mike in the library where he is jump scared nearly to death by Henry Bowers. Mike is able to fight him off with the help of Richie, who shows up to lodge a hatchet in Bowers' skull. It's pretty nasty, and Richie seems to agree as he throws up for the second time in one movie.
Guess you could say that was long overdue. Get it? Because we're in a library.
Which, I mean, I guess is pretty fair. It's time for the big showdown, and once again, Bill delivers an emotional speech to all of his friends before they enter the house on Neibolt Street for the last time. Much like in the first movie, the scenes that take place in the house on Neibolt Street are chock full of jump scares and scary, upsetting things, and this is a good chunk of the remainder of the movie, so strap in for a while. I will say they do reuse a lot of the same jokes from the first movie here.
Let's kill this fucking clown?
And I mean, they are really funny ones, but still. We get another beep beep Richie though, so they won me over again. I'm weak.
Well, I love what he's done with the place.
Beep beep, Richie.
Ben gets his stomach carved up by Pennywise, and Richie is attacked by Stanley's decapitated head, which has sprouted these big spider legs. I told you, it gets gross for a while. Eddie completely freezes up when Richie is attacked, showing none of the bravery that we know is there from when he stabbed Bowers. Bill is furious with Eddie for not doing anything, and in defending his inaction, Eddie touches on the most basic and resonant theme of this movie when he says,
Please don't be mad, Bill. I was just scared.
I noticed in the first movie that when the fear they were experiencing was for their friends rather than for themselves, it almost made them stronger, and that's when they were able to defeat Pennywise the first time. However, in this moment, the fear that Eddie has for Richie is so debilitating that he cannot do anything at all. Whether that speaks to how their relationship has changed as adults or to how fear affects Eddie as an adult is hard to say. Anyway, the losers go deeper into the sewer to prepare for the ritual of Chewed. Eddie is still feeling unable to go up against it until he gets some encouragement from his friends. Richie gives him a pep talk and says,
You're braver than you think.
and Beverly hands him a fire poker, telling him,
It kills monsters. If you believe it does.
this is another example in this movie about how the character development is so much more important than big scary monsters. Things are infinitely scarier when you genuinely care about the people being terrorized, and that can't be accomplished without fully fleshed out and realized characters, which is something that this movie does beautifully. Now it is time for the ritual of Chewed as they all toss in their artifacts. We never saw Mike find his artifact, which is strange considering we saw everybody else find theirs, but his artifact is the first rock that Beverly threw at Bowers during the Rock War that summer. I think this is really sweet, and it would have been nice to have a scene with Mike exploring that. But I digress. The ritual kicks off as they all burn their items, and we get really trippy for a while. A giant spider Pennywise appears in one hell of a jump scare, and there is just general peril for a while. The losers get split up with Ben and Beth paired together, Richie and Eddie paired together, and then Mike and Bill on their own. There's some spooky silliness with Eddie and Richie and some severed legs and this cute dog that turns into a disgusting monster. Really standard fare for these movies. Bill then appears to be back in his childhood basement where he saw Pennywise wearing Georgie like an arm puppet, only now Bill is the one wearing the Georgie puppet. I told you, trippy. Bill comes face to face with his younger self, a personification of the guilt he has held on to his entire life. Symbolically, he shoots his younger self in the head with the same bolt gun he used to kill Pennywise as Georgie in Chapter 1. After effectively facing his deepest fear, he is able to escape the nightmare and get one step closer to defeating Pennywise. In Beverly's nightmare, she is trapped in this bathroom stall as it is flooding with blood, and a variety of different monsters yell horrible things at her. Similarly, Ben is trapped in the clubhouse as dirt is getting piled on top of him, burying him alive, as Pennywise calls him things like fatty loser! Ben and Beverly are trying to reach each other and are unable to until Ben screams out the words of the poem he wrote for her.
Your hair is winter fire! January embers!
Finally, realizing that Ben has loved her for all this time, Beverly is able to reach out, grab his hand, and pull him up out of the dirt. They are always able to fight fear most effectively with love, and that is something that this friend group has a lot of. It's a nice reversal of Ben kissing Beverly back to life from Chapter 1, and honestly just such a relief that their feelings are out in the open. This moment was a little soured for me when I went to see it in the theaters due to the man sitting next to me who felt the need to shout out loud, "Kiss her, you fool," every time Ben and Bev were on screen together. However, I am really glad that they don't kiss right here because A, Bev is drenched in blood, and B, they're kinda busy. They are all out of their respective nightmares and back together to face off against Pennywise, but quickly Pennywise traps Richie in his deadlights. Eddie refuses to make the same mistake he made earlier, and he steps the fuck up with a beautiful battle cry.
Beep, beep, motherfucker!
He stabs Pennywise with the monster-killing fire poker that Bev gave to him earlier and saves Richie. Things get really tough now as Eddie celebrates the fact that he thinks he killed Pennywise, but is quickly cut off by this huge claw that goes through his back and out to the other side. The losers are absolutely devastated, and it's actually kind of hard to watch them all scream like this. Pennywise flings Eddie around like a rag doll before tossing him aside. All of his friends run to him, but after seeing the damage that has been done to him, they realize there's nothing they can do to help him until they defeat Pennywise and get him out of there. With Eddie's help, they figure out that if they can get it small enough, then they can kill it. After physically trapping him somewhere small and forcing him to shrink down doesn't work, they realize that
there's more than one way to make someone small.
And they change tactics to try and make Pennywise believe that he is. Essentially what happens is that they bully Pennywise and call him a clown until he is so embarrassed that he dies. And that rings really true to me. After killing it for good, the entire house on Neibolt Street and the tunnel system begin to collapse, and they have to get out of there. They run back to Eddie, where it becomes apparent that he has lost too much blood and has died while they were dealing with Pennywise. Richie still insists on getting Eddie out of there and getting him to a hospital, and Beverly has to explain to him that he is dead, which is heartbreaking.
He's dead.
That movie trope of someone being convinced that they can help somebody who is clearly already dead is always so difficult, and this is no different.
He's all right. No, he's just hurt. We gotta get him out of here. He's hurt. Ben. Chill.
As if I thought I couldn't be any sadder about this character death, on my second viewing I noticed that Eddie's eyes look so scared even when he's dead, and the fact that Pennywise has frozen him in his fear forever is tragic. I'm not even being over dramatic, but at this point I got so sad that I stopped taking notes, so excuse me while I fly a little blind for the rest of this. The losers physically drag Richie out of the house, leaving Eddie's body behind as the house collapses into a crater in the ground. All of the survivors head back to the quarry to wash off the emotional and physical grime of the last couple of days. They joke about how much Eddie would have hated cleaning himself in dirty water, and that seems to be Richie's breaking point. It's always hard to see someone who always brings a sense of levity to any situation break down like this, and I want to read a piece of direction that Andy Muschietti gave to Bill Hader while filming this scene. He was going, "Now Bill, I need you to cry, and then I need you to splash each other, and then I need you to go back to childhood. And then Bill, I need you to realize that you cannot go back to childhood. And then I need you to cry like you've never cried." Fuck. They all pile onto Richie and comfort him, which you already know I love, until Richie is finally able to break the tension with a joke.
I don't have my glasses on, so I don't know who you people are, but thank you very much.
Ben and Bev share a beautiful kiss underwater, which I adore, and after washing up, the remaining losers walk through Derry one last time. In the reflection of a store window, they see themselves as children, including Stan and Eddie, and if I was not already crying before, it's game over for me now. Sometime later, we catch up with the losers in a sort of epilogue. We see that this time around, they aren't forgetting the details of their experience, good or bad. Mike is finally getting out of Derry, Bill is writing a new book about friends that are worth being scared for, and Ben and Bev are together at last, being the most attractive couple on Earth, on a boat with a dog. We see Richie at the kissing bridge going over that carving he made as a kid, and it is revealed to be his and Eddie's initials. I think that it was a really good idea for this movie to demonstrate Richie's romantic feelings for Eddie, building off of the implied romantic feelings that Eddie has for Richie in the book. It rounds out their storyline really well and makes it even more tragic that whatever their relationship may have evolved to be gets no closure due to Eddie's death. However, I do think that this could have been made more powerful if it was clearly expressed in either the first movie or earlier on in this film. We close out the movie with a voiceover of a letter that Stan wrote to all of the other losers in anticipation of his death. He explains why he did what he did, and we get little snapshots of the losers and their mostly happy endings. One of the last things that we see is a slow-mo shot of the losers all riding their bikes together, and I am reduced to a puddle as the credits roll. And thus ends It Chapter 2, something that I think is a beautiful and loving adaptation of source material that means a lot to me, and I'm really glad it exists. Here's to friendship and to the act of remembering the good stuff. And don't forget, there's nothing to be scared of. It's called Passion, look it up.